And so I have the pleasure of being the moderator, and I am going to introduce you to two incredible higher education leaders that I've had the pleasure of working with for the past several years. And so we'll start with hearing from Nick Petford, who is the Vice Chancellor and CEO of the University of Northampton. And you'll hear a bit more about the visionary work he's been doing to transform the entire institution with a change maker lens and ethos, and have it be built into the accountability and performance measures of all leaders and all community partnerships. And we are going to hear a little bit more about how some of that has also led to an ability to be more adaptive and innovative, because a lot of the culture and structures were already in place for being a change-making institution. We will also hear from Micki Meyer, so we wanted to make sure there was different types of institutions as well as different geographies represented. And so we'll go from the UK to Florida. So Micki is joining us from Rollins College, and she's currently serving as interim vice president of student affairs, and wearing multiple hats, because just before the crisis, the Dean of Students and the VP left. So she is now filling three roles, and being an extra superhero more than she already is in the most difficult time in higher ed. So kudos to you, Micki. But I think what is really exciting is we wanted to also bring different perspectives of how leadership happens from different parts of the institution, but also the importance of leadership teams and how kind of leaders can work together. So we're so excited to hear from your perspective as well, and what you've been doing at Rollins College. And so just to set the context before we dive into two institutional case studies and two leadership stories, this is a time where we have four compounding major global crises. Of course, there's the global health pandemic, which is the most serious that we've had in a century. We're also entering a global recession, which is always fun to have on top of that. And then, of course, what's so important is that we're, especially in the United States, becoming more open with our reckoning with systemic racism and all types of inequality and oppression. And this is something that now is, not possible to not address, which is actually incredibly important. And then finally, climate change. That's if the other things don't get us, that's going to get us eventually. So I think four simultaneous global crises that affect, influence, and intersect with higher education, but also invite higher education to lead in a new way, which has huge implications for what it means to be a formal leader with a position of authority, decision-making power, budgetary authority in higher ed. So as Dean mentioned, I mean, just the time is unprecedented and there is no guidebook. And as President Vasquez-Levy said, the past, things that were best practices in leadership in the past are definitely not best practices in our uncertain future. So we need to throw out the old past data and best practices. We need to develop a new roadmap. And I would argue that change making is an important lens to bring to that, because there's both the mental attributes of change making, of how you look at your assets, make the best of them, particularly human assets, where you pull the best ideas out of all of the stakeholders in your community to say, what can we do? Let's not say what all the problems are. Let's say, what can we do, and move from there. But then I also think the other part of change making, in addition to the positive, asset-based, creative, collaborative approach that anything is possible, no matter how impossible or daunting it might seem, is where the heart comes in, and being empathetic, listening, shocking, listening in times of crisis, being able to allow more people to have perspectives and be part of a change process, and just being open to adapting. I think it's a whole new game for the type of leadership that we need. And we're really we're excited that the work we've been doing as the Ashoka U network for over a decade, we think has prepared and equipped people with the types of mindsets, skill sets, and heart-based attributes that actually are effective in these particularly times of crisis. So with that, we'll start with Nick. So Nick, if you can tell us a little bit, the University of Northampton, what have you been doing in response particularly to the COVID crisis? And how have you put on your changemaker leader cap to be innovative and solutions oriented?
Well, thank you, Marina, and hello to everybody tuning in. I should just explain briefly that this lovely view behind me isn't real, it's a green screen. In fact, it's 5:30 here in the UK and it's raining outside, so it's getting rather gloomy. So you've got a much nicer backdrop than you'd have if I actually showed you where I really am, which is my shed in the back of my garden. Anyway, so what is our response to COVID and what innovations has that led to? So in a couple of minutes, I'll answer the question. We started this whole COVID analysis really from a theoretical response based around this concept of VUCA. You may have heard of it, VUCA or VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, which is developed actually by the US military to help navigate a post-Cold War world. There's been research on this at Harvard Business School and others looking at VUCA and how to respond from a corporate perspective. And pre-COVID, the way that the equation worked was that volatility required vision, uncertainty required a level of understanding, complexity could be dealt with by courage, and ambiguity through adaptability. Now that was fine, that's a canon, that's in the literature, but we looked at this afresh during the early stages of the UK lockdown, which happened in Britain on the 24th of March, and came up with a different set of responses. So instead of for volatile, we wanted to be resilient. I think resilience is really important. For complexity, as much data as you can get possibly, so informed with data where possible. But perhaps surprisingly, we wanted to face down ambiguity with risk taking. Might sound a bit odd, I'll come back to that in a second. And importantly for the changemaker ethos, dealing with uncertainty through principles, a principled approach that rests on values. I should just reference David Lord. He made the important point of the role of governors in all of this. And in case I do forget, all of this was sense checked with the board. We've got fantastic expertise at governance level, and their support and expertise has been vital throughout the last couple of months. So to unpack those two slightly, why would you, in a time of a global pandemic, respond to ambiguity with risk taking? It sounds very odd. Rash, perhaps. What we meant by that was not to let the present crowd out the future. Okay, this pandemic will pass. In times of crises, often organizations can become fiercely myopic, really focus down on the laser on a few things at the expense of others. And I think that was a mistake. So what we mean by not being risk averse is not going down that rather short-sighted instant response path at the expense of everything else. We don't want to get sucked into a vortex, basically. Wanted to make sure that we kept space open for future focused developments. And those include big things like how we refresh and redesign our portfolio of courses. So on the innovation piece, Marina, we're looking at areas of significant new innovation, not just in the mode of delivery. I mean, going online, bluntly, is hardly the most revolutionary thing that universities can do. But how we might work with some really exciting educational technology startups to deliver things like virtual placements and virtual internships and co-created with industry in a demand-led model, which places a lot of emphasis actually on the module itself as opposed to the 3-year undergraduate experience. That's a real big shake-up for us, but I think we're going to make significant progress in that. So short bites of learning, not necessarily the traditional 3-year degree, being the main aim of what we do at a university, perhaps. We've been doing this in a limited way, by the way. One of my colleagues, John Sinclair, is here with us, and he's been working in some specialist areas of engineering and design at the university, where we're offering these bite-sized chunks. But we now want to take this in a radically scaled-up way. And COVID, bluntly, has provided the disruption and the opportunity for us to move on this quickly. The other response hopefully resonates with the group here. This is the idea that uncertainty could be challenged and dealt with through the notion of principles. What does that mean? Well, it means in essence, you must stay true to your values, truer than ever to your value set, and also the changemaker values, which we found incredibly helpful in guiding us through that principle piece.
Fantastic. How would you say, and so classes start in 2 weeks for you.
Yeah.
So what will look different? this year from last year?
Well, I guess the same as in many US, North American, South American universities, social distancing is now the norm. I'm interested to hear from others about the official government response to this. The UK government has been pretty vague, to be fair, so we've been left largely to our own devices. There's been some official guidance, but nothing explicitly aimed at universities. Which might sound a bit odd, given that we're expecting, potentially hundreds, maybe even thousands of overseas students from China and India and all the rest of it to turn up in a couple of weeks. But we've designed and modified our campus so we can accommodate face-to-face teaching for a couple of hours a day maximum, supplemented by online learning. We're expecting to be open for halls of residence. In fact, we will be open for halls of residence, but of course we've had to be careful in how we share out bedrooms and bathrooms and all of that sort of planning. We've had a long time to do it. We've been working on this since late spring, and I think we've got a fantastically redesigned campus. Luckily, we moved into a new estate quite recently, and everything is pretty much on one site. So what that means is that if there is a lockdown, and let's face it, there will be outbreaks of COVID-19 amongst our students, it's without question that will happen. We can move really quickly to isolate and seal off the affected areas, which is something that the local authorities are very keen that we do. It'd be much more difficult if we had a large number of perhaps older buildings and a rambling estate across the city. That's a different prospect. We're lucky that we've got everything condensed into one place.
So could you actually back up a few years and talk a little bit about, some of the major milestones for how you have embedded the ethos and values and culture of change making into your institution, the education, the community partnerships, but also the physical space?
Yeah, when we were really taken by the whole Changemaker idea back in, I think, 2013, Marina, we first became a Changemaker campus. And at that time, we were in a different part of the town of Northampton. We were split on two sites, separated by 3 or 4 miles, relatively old buildings. What we wanted to do was to create a new, exciting teaching and learning space for staff, for students, for research. Partly, in fact, based on a visit I had to Ryerson. I was really impressed by how they'd embedded that sort of design, the architecture, the structure of that building right into the heart of the city. And so that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to relocate into the middle of the town centre. And in doing so, that would allow us to be much more engaged with the civic agenda. So our big play around the Changemaker values is the idea of social impact, social entrepreneurship, and that involves working with local companies, local businesses, delivering social value to the community, and that's best done if you're actually living and breathing right in the heart of it. So I think our relocation really enabled us to up the ante on our social impact mission. I know you're going to ask me a bit later about what we did. We've got some great examples of how, when the COVID struck, we were able to really use the estate, the campus, as a massive community asset for the benefit of the local people.
Actually, can you actually share a couple examples right now?
Well, one of the things several things that we did, so basically using this notion of a principle valued-led response, linking the strategy to this goal, which is also a Changemaker goal, to drive social impact locally in communities. We opened our doors basically to the community at a number of levels. One of the first things we did was open a drive-through COVID-19 test and assessment centre on our campus. So if you were referred by a local doctor, a GP, before going to hospital, a lot of people were rocking up in A&E with symptoms that were COVID-like but weren't COVID. That was causing stress, it was blocking beds and causing an inefficiency in the system. So we took a lot of those people out of that system to our campus where we could test them, and found actually large numbers were not COVID, didn't have the COVID-19. So that took a lot of pressure and stress away from the local hospitals. And that ran up until a couple of weeks ago, all throughout. We've got a hotel on our campus, as I'm sure many of other my colleagues around the virtual table have hotels. All of our rooms free of charge to health workers working on shifts. We also got halls of residence. Some of them weren't at capacity. In fact, a lot of them were vacant because of the COVID. And so we, free of charge, we gave those over to nurses working on night shift and also local police officers. So we had a whole community of health workers and security experts working and living together on our estate. Student volunteers, we had over 400 final year, so that's year 3, nurses, midwives, occupational therapy specialists, paramedics, who took up posts at local hospitals to help out. We used our campus as a centre for food bank distribution because people couldn't get some people couldn't get out of the house, so we were delivering local food, etc. Finally, we actually used some of our space as a shelter, a safe shelter for unfortunate victims of domestic abuse, which is one of the awful side effects of people being locked up together for long periods of time. So we did all that stuff for free. It costed up, it's close to $3 million investment in the local community. And to be fair, the response from both the staff and the students has been absolutely overwhelmingly positive throughout.
Just a lot of, just thinking from the changemaker mindset approach of just what are the assets, how can they be used and adapted to serve what's needed and who is in most need. I think that's just really beautiful. Thank you. So now we'll actually shift over to Micki. And what I'd love to draw out on you, we heard a lot about examples and strategies and kind of institutional response. I'd actually like to bring it home a little bit more to more of the personal elements and the leadership attributes and how different types of leadership are needed and different skill sets are needed across the leadership team. So love, Micki, if you can just share a little bit in the Rollins context, where have you seen this time of crisis and uncertainty bring out positive leadership attributes in yourself or other colleagues at the senior leadership level? And what are some of the examples of how that leadership has responded to one of the many crises that we're all facing right now?
Thanks, Marina. And Nick, that is very inspiring work, and it's very courageous work.
Well, thank you.
And I think lots of times when our backs are up against a challenge and a crisis, the initial response is to kind of duck. It's not to open and engage. Especially, as Dean was talking about, what are the competing and parallel priorities that we have at our institutions around financial, learning, and health?
Yep.
Sometimes it's difficult to do what really needs to be done as change makers and as institutions. So I just wanted to recognize what you're saying and honor and uplift that as the very example of change making that we need to be doing at our institutions. And I'm Micki Meyer. As Marina said, I guess you can call me all duties as assigned at this moment, but I'm not a stranger to higher education. I've been in higher ed for over 20 years. I've been a part of the Ashoka network for over 10 years. I met Marina and her team at Duke. I think it was one of the first exchanges that Ashoka put on. And I remember sitting in the back with a few of our faculty. There was the change leader recognition ceremony, and we thought, maybe Rollins can be on that stage. And a few years later, there we were. And I'm so happy to work with Angie and have such a strong relationship, and with Emily in the work. I also want to say quickly, David Lord, who's one of our trustees on the phone. So my title is actually Lord Family Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs and Community. That's my everyday title. And that Lord Family piece, I serve in an endowed chair role by the generous philanthropy of David Lord and his family. So I just wanted to name that. As Marina was framing in the beginning, the convergence of challenges and opportunities to lead right now, we're not at a loss for them. And not to tell a Florida joke, but as an institution in Florida with the convergence of hurricanes, we're used to adapting in different storms coming at different moments. But, I think all of us as leaders, instead of framing these as challenges, I think that they're moments of great growth. And we've tried to use that framing even in our own family. I have my husband and my 8-year-old. We recognize every moment and say, how is this an opportunity for us to grow and to change? And I will say with that, I believe truly the greatest strategic asset and strategic tool that we have right now is our ability to love and to lead with empathy. Because as Nick said, this is temporary. Challenges are going to come and go. But focusing on the human and the human connection and the human condition has never been more important. And I think many of us sitting in these chairs of leadership, we're used to having the answers, we're used to giving meaning. And this has really been this moment of, we really don't know what's going to happen day to day. But what we can do is we can love. And that can be scary when we're used to maybe not leading with vulnerability or authenticity. And so one of the things I have found through the ebbs and flows of the conditions and the convergence of multiple opportunities to lead, trying to situate on the strategic priorities and try to situate on compassion. So we went through a workforce, a pretty significant workforce reduction to prepare our budgets, recognizing that as we were going to be going into the fall, what could things look like? That ended up having, we lost about 100 people and positions. And if you think a small liberal arts institution of 700 employees, that is pretty significant. We've had to figure out how to bring people back to work, like all of you, to think about hopes and fears and dreams, recognizing that every single one of us has a lived story when their door closes at their home, with family, with elder care, with community, with own anxieties and fears. We've really tried to empower and engage people across the table in decision making. So, our president, Grant Cornwell, would be the first to say that our work and our success, I think, in developing a really good plan to bring students back is because of all people coming around the table and saying, how can we engage this situation in this moment? I think similar to Nick, the collaboration that we're seeing has never been more important, and it's never been more reflective. Areas of the institution that have never necessarily worked side to side together on problems because maybe we haven't had the time, or maybe we've been lazy, or maybe we've been worried about turf, maybe we've been fearful, are now doing that. And so Marina, you asked about one specific opportunity. So maybe I can talk a little bit about not COVID for a second, but obviously inextricably connected to COVID, which is really the cultural revolution that we're seeing in the United States at this moment. And, obviously this current moment has called for such a radical need for beloved community and anti-racism. And I would say, although that we're seeing efforts for global democratic change, systemic and institutional change across the generations, race, class, gender, identity. Leadership is coming from young people. And what they're saying to us is enough. Enough. And when I think about that as a leader, and as we've thought about that as leaders at Rollins, is, colleges and universities have never, ever had more of an ethical and a moral obligation to take a look in the mirror and say, what harm have I caused? And how do we engage in this work, working alongside, one another in this reckoning around racial justice and obvious inequality? So what has that looked like in terms of examples and how we've engaged this moment? And I think it's really been an opportunity for us to look at every single level of the institution and every single person in the institution to recognize we're all responsible and we're all implicated in this moment to do our own work. And that's led to a really incredible, robust series of racial justice conversations and racial justice learning groups that have engaged folks from facilities and finance and housekeeping and dining to faculty to staff to VPs to cabinet to start thinking and looking within in order to lead without, or we lead out. And all of this, I don't know if we would have done this deep and often complicated, painful work without the opportunity at this moment, which is going to really lead us into a whole racial justice, reconciliation, and truth project of our campus, acknowledging where is our institution, which again is in Florida, liberal arts, predominantly white institution in the South, where we have created or caused harm. And how do we make sure through innovation and through our own analysis of self, we're creating a much more just future, whether that's our curriculum, our student admission, on our own work. So just a couple reflections about this moment and what I've been thinking and feeling as it leads to this opportunity to lead.
Could you actually share the concrete example around the students and how you built a bridge between? Yeah, I'll let you go from there.
This is good. So I just maybe a quick show of hands. If is anybody dealing with student activism on social media right now, specifically when it comes to their own institution and really holding a light at their own institution? Maybe a show of hands or a head nod, or maybe you're witnessing it if you're on Instagram or Facebook. Well, I will say that, young people, they're very, very angry and frustrated. And I would say absolutely rightfully so. And they're tired of waiting, absolutely rightfully so. And they're saying enough. And they're also, many of them are at home, and they're on their keyboards. And they're looking for meaning and connection and voice to create change. And so one of the things that we started seeing, again, rightfully so, is our students starting to shine the light on our own institution, whether it was how tuition was set or how the institution was leading in this moment, how students of color felt on our campus, how resources were being deployed, how our values are being put forth. And for a while, the response was, gosh, why are students doing this? This is really frustrating. It's causing harm to our institution. This is cancel culture, which I know many of us are looking at right now on our campuses and on our communities. But what I have recognized in generational activism is that there's some constant conditions that can cut across the generations. Love, as I talked about earlier, and the ability and need to be in relationship. And so one of the responses was, let's get a media forensic investigator to identify who are these students and why are they doing this and why are they taking out ads. And I said, has anybody reached out to the students to sit at the table? And it was like, oh, is that a strategy? Is that something we should be thinking about? So we did. And reached out to the students and said, hey, let's sit down, let's talk, let's hear what's on your mind. Let's hear. And through those conversations, I realized, A, I would hire every single one of them to work for me because they're brilliant and they're passionate and they're strategic and they're right. And B, we could really use a lot of their energy and collective wisdom to create change on our campus. And so where we had a social media problem with some of these, what some might call rogue groups, they become our greatest assets and allies as we're deploying messages across campus, simply for wanting to build relationships in this moment. And they're going to be working alongside us on our Racial Truth and Reconciliation project. They've helped us write surveys to look at the 9 dimensions of wellness and fears that students have for coming back to campus. They're creating a video right now about the TARS promise, which is how do we make sure that students are engaging in collective accountability around responsible behavior once on campus. And so I think as leaders, we can't underestimate the moment to be in pure relationship with our students because they're looking for a way to create change alongside all of us.
Amazing. So just final question, and then we'll potentially have one or a few more minutes just to open it up for any feedback or comments from the group, but just final 1 minute response from both Nick and Micki. As I'm hearing all of this, there's again a combination of really beautiful mental skill sets, whether it's how you see opportunity, how you view the world, how you view potential, how you're just undaunted. There's so much resilience and creativity and innovation that is emerging in this time. And there's also so much in terms of leaning into the heart, whether it's compassion, love, empathy, a lot of the values and ways of being that Micki talked about that also I think are really important to activate a lot of that potential in the communities that you're working with. So you as leaders, where do you land? And this is also for everyone in the group, a little bit of a segue into some of the breakout group discussions. So get your own thinking hats on. What is the right balance of leading with head versus heart? Or what is the right balance of integrating head and heart, particularly in times of uncertainty and crisis? And where have you had to grow through this time? Nick, if you want to go first.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was, one of the things I wanted to, before that, is just touch briefly on some of the positive outcomes that we've touched upon as leaders. And I'm thinking back, Marina, to the discussion of the senior leaders experience in April, where it appeared that universities had found their magic superpower that some never knew they had, which is basically, yes, you can do things quickly. So looking at projects that may have taken 4 or 5 years in the university sector, I think will be done in a couple of years. That's definitely head versus heart. But I think that notion of speediness, that we can do things quickly, is going to be essential in a post-COVID world. One example is the portfolio review that we've been looking at. We've been skirting around the edges for a couple of years, but now's the time to really jump in and innovate at pace. I think reflecting on what Micki said, more of the heart stuff perhaps, but also with a hard logic to it, changes in working environment for our staff in particular, not just home working, and very drawn by what Micki was saying on the whole equality and diversity agenda, how that will then become really significant as we kind of hold up a mirror to ourselves as a community and as educators and see what we've got right and bluntly what we've got wrong, and then correcting those wrongs quickly. One example might be that we're all talking about going online and pivoting online and all the rest of it. There's this idea growing in the UK, I'm not sure if it's reached you in the US yet, of digital poverty. Digital poverty, the idea that it's all well and good sticking everything online, but suppose you live in a cramped house with no IT connections, you're already excluded from the university experience. So obviously universities can't build houses and communities in the sense that we can't put in infrastructure, but we need to be cognizant, right? And that's a heart thing as much as a head thing. We can't just say everything is hunky-dory because it's online when we're inadvertently perhaps excluding people. I think what I'd like to see in terms of my fellow leaders would be a less risk averseness, perhaps being less traditionalist. Tradition is great in universities, but it can hold us back sometimes. Open to new ideas, new collaborations. In Britain, I'm talking from a UK perspective here, maybe this will resonate across the ponds, maybe not, but sometimes in Britain, higher education can feel a bit claustrophobic, compounded by things like global rankings and the sort of winner takes all mentality, which has grown up over the last decade or so. And again, from a UK perspective, it's sometimes wrapped up in class, notions of class, and often our political leaders, you get the impression that some universities are really, really good for other people's children. And I'd like to see some of that thinking change.
Thank you, Dick. Micki?
Echo everything that Nick said and add that as leaders, we need to trust our people are going to do what needs to be done. I'll add, we can only innovate as quickly as we walk alongside others and recognizing that human connection is the fuel for innovation. I'll add that higher ed is so slow to change, but what we've recognized is we can change quickly, given the right conditions and an urgency to do so. And so that's what I have found so exciting as somebody who deeply loves challenges. would rather not have challenges on the back of a global pandemic and people's health and safety, but that we are able to actually, we're doing things that we've talked about for many, many years, but maybe haven't had the time, the energy, the effort. We've had fear, we've been risk averse to do them, and they're going to make higher education and our institutions stronger because we've done them. So that would be my closing remarks around that.